Hello there, people of the internet. So I'm feeling a little nostalgic today, and I keep getting asked by a lot of people, especially people that are wanting to learn more about firearms. I keep getting asked, like, what got me into guns? Why did it become such a passion for me? I think it's obviously a passion for me because it is literally what I do in my spare time all the time. And I've been asked on numerous occasions what exactly got me into firearms, and I figured I'd go ahead and I would make a whole video on it just because I'm feeling a little bit nostalgic today. So, originally what actually got me into firearms is just like with everybody else, like 99.999% of the time, it's a combination of my father had firearms and I saw them in video games and movies. That is like the seeds that were planted that got me into firearms. So, first, video games and movies. I was subject to, obviously, video games and movies at a very young age. Whenever I was growing up, I was playing, like, the original Call of Duties, the Call of Duty Finest Hour / Call of Duty 1, Call of Duty 2, and Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1, and then the classic Call of Duty 3, which was my favorite. And I just remember playing these games and checking out, all these old firearms and whatnot. And I didn't really know much about the history behind the firearms themselves, but I knew that they were used in World War II on account of these video games, right? And I was checking out, in the Call of Duty series, you have like all sorts of different firearms from all sorts of different countries and whatnot, and it was just a really good mishmash of all different sorts of information and things to check out. And whenever I was young, I would like do research on these different guns, and I would like learn things about them. Like, wow, this isn't just something from Call of Duty. The MP40 is a real thing. I must have been like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old whenever I had realized that the MP40 was not just a video game gun and that it was a gun in real life. And I was like, I'm gonna own one of these days. And at that age, I didn't know anything about firearms, obviously. I was an incredibly young age. And I didn't really know if we were allowed to own them or not. Like, I've heard that, like, machine guns and things like that were illegal here in the United States. Obviously, nowadays, I know that there's certain time periods you got to get them from, and they got to be tax stamped and et cetera, et cetera. This isn't a video about all of that, but I should do a video on all of that. I don't have one because I don't have 10 grand to spend on a single firearm, but I digress. I knew that they were very heavily restricted and that I probably wasn't going to own one, and now I'm thinking I probably am at one point or another, but back then I didn't even think that I'd be able to own any firearm whatsoever. I thought that I was not aware of the Second Amendment for the United States existing. I was, incredibly young. And then my father was cleaning out his closet one day, and he had like a couple of 22s, a couple of 12-gauge pump-action shotguns, a 30-30 lever-action, and an old revolver on his bed while he was clearing out his closet. I don't know why I started so bad there. But he was clearing out his closet, and I walked over to them, and I saw them. I think I was like, 8 years old at the time. I think it was like right as my brother was born. Was whenever I like really discovered my love for firearms. It might have been a little bit sooner than that, but again, I digress. The time period itself doesn't matter. My father had a bunch of guns on the bed, and I saw them, and I was like, hey, are any of these loaded? And he was like, no, but let's go ahead and double check them, make sure they aren't loaded. And I was, he had double checked them, showed me how to check them, make sure that they weren't loaded, and I was just absolutely fascinated by these, because I didn't know that we owned them. I had no idea that the family had guns, and suddenly I'm like, holy crap, we got a whole pile of guns over here on the bed. And my father was like, yeah, I'll take you out. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. Kevin's my peacock. I got 4 of them. They're all named Kevin. He was like, yeah, I'll take you out one of these days and teach you how to shoot them. And if you like it, then hey man, that's really good for you. Guns in private civilian ownership are absolutely a really good thing here in the United States, and there's a lot to learn about them. So I was like, hell yes, I want to absolutely learn how to run one of these. So I can't remember when it was, but I know that we went out to a friend of mine who is he's unfortunately passed away now. But he was a dirt bike rider, and he has these huge hills at his house, or at least he did whenever he was around. He had these big hills at his house, and he lived out in the middle of nowhere. Well, we go out there with a bunch of our firearms and we set up some targets on a hill, and he teaches me how to aim down my sights, how to pull the trigger, how to make hits on target. And I'm using a 22, so there's like no recoil. And then I step up to a 410 shotgun, and I remember, because I was really small at the time, I remember that being really tough, the recoil for me to handle on it. And then I tried the 12 gauge, and I got through like 1 or 2 shells of bird shotting. I was like, nah, I'm done with that. That is way too much for me. So I ended up sticking with the 410 and the 22. That 410 single shot shotgun actually belonged to like my great grandfather and was passed down through the generations, and it became my first gun. And I like learned the fundamentals of shooting with that right there. And that was where I was at for a long time. I ended up moving in with my mother at a pretty young age. I think I was like 11 or 12 or something like that. I moved in with my mother. And at the time, she was anti-gun. She's no longer anti-gun because she's learned a lot more about them. But at the time, she was anti-gun, so my shotgun was with my father. And I would go see him occasionally, like maybe once or twice a year. I didn't really get the opportunity to play with firearms. But after I had left my mother's house, I rediscovered my love for firearms. There's a lot more in with this story. I remember one of the times where I was still living with my mother, but up visiting my father, he ended up getting me this. He didn't get me this one right here, but he got me a Mosin Nagant 9130. I've shown off the actual Mosin Nagant that he got me many times on this channel. It was like my first legitimate firearm that was a centerfire firearm, that was a centerfire rifle. He picked up one of these for like $80 off of the internet, and he gifted it to me. Before that, I was into firearms, but I wasn't wholeheartedly into firearms. But whenever he had gifted me that rifle, I was like, holy crap, do you know what this is? This is a Mosin Nagant. I know a lot about this rifle. For him, he was just buying a cheap rifle online to gift to his son, so his son could enjoy. And whenever I started telling him about the history behind it, I'm like, look, this right here is from the, it wasn't developed from the Soviet Union, but the one I had gotten was a World War II model. It's a 1944 production or something like that. I was like, this is from World War II. This was used against the Germans during the Second World War, or more than likely against the Germans during the Second World War. It's got a Soviet crest on it right there. Then I started going to the history of the Mosin, made in 1891. This way it was the 9130 pattern. There's a couple of carbine variants. I knew a lot about the Mosin Nagant because I was interested in it from the video games and whatnot. And my father was like, wow, you sure know a lot about this old rifle that I just freaking bought off the internet. It was a good rifle for what that's worth. I stuck a lot of ammunition through it. Back then, you could get those big Spam cans of ammo for like $45 a piece, 440 rounds. I really regret not stocking up on more of that. I bet a lot of us do. My father had gotten me that rifle, and like I said, that reignited the spark for my love for guns because I knew a lot about it. And I impressed people with the amount of knowledge that I knew about the Mosin Nagant. And then I was like, yeah, that's just the Russians. I know about the American rifles. I know about the British rifles. I know about the Japanese rifles. I know about the, Italian Carcano series. I know about the German rifles. I know, anyone who's ever played any Call of Duty games, you probably know a lot about those old World War II rifles. And I was just blowing everybody out of the water with how much I knew about all these different old rifles. And then this was right before the Obama scare came along, so all these rifles were really cheap, and I was doing research on them, and I was like, wow, these are not very expensive at all. And at the time, I was too young to be able to purchase them myself. There were some occasions where I got my father to buy them, and they were his, so I would just play with them and check them out and whatnot, but they were his. I remember after I had gotten my Mosin Nagant, actually, on this YouTube channel, the very early couple of episodes, I'm showing off my very early firearms. I had my Mosin Nagant. I'm pretty sure I showed off the Remington/Mossberg shotguns that I had laying around. I know I showed off a couple of black powder revolvers, and I showed off a Chiappa 22 long rifle, which was my first handgun that I'd gotten. My father got me that around the time that he got me this Mosin, whenever I discovered how much I absolutely loved it. And I had a Ruger Mark III, I think. .22 long rifle, little handgun. I mean, it was a great gun, but I ended up trading it for a Volunteer Enterprise Commando Mark III. So it worked out in my favor, I'd like to say, because now I have a Thompson M1A1 lookalike. But that's a whole other story. I remember growing up, I had a friend of mine. I think this was like the actual legitimate turning point where I was like, all right, I want to be a gun guy and I want to play with these old firearms. I remember growing up, I had a buddy of mine. He was my next door neighbor, actually, at the house that I grew up in. And he was the one who introduced me to the video games and the movies and whatnot that had firearms in them. I mean, at the time, I was not allowed to play video games or watch TV or anything like that. I got like half an hour of TV a day, and that was all that I got. Besides that, I had to go outside. But my buddy, who was my next door neighbor, introduced me to these video games and whatnot, and I was like ecstatic about it. And I remember, I mean, we were really young, 5, 6, 7, 8. We were young. Not, maybe more around 8 or 9, perhaps 10. We were young. Anyway, at that age, we would like play outside and pretend that we were using these old firearms to, fight off the Germans during World War II. That's just what boys did back in the day. You were fighting off Nazis. You were in a foxhole with your buddy, which was just this pathetic little hole that you dug in the ground, and you had a couple of sticks that very crudely resembled rifles. And you were just over there fighting off the Nazis, just bang, pretending like you're cycling a bolt action, pretending like you're shoving rounds into the receiver. Your friend pretends that he gets hit, and you're like, oh God, we need a medic! And then the friend, I remember his little brother, he had like this bag full of, it was like a trash bag full of random miscellaneous crap, and he would come running across the battlefield like, come on boy, I'll cover you! Bang! 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 I remember those days very fondly. Back then I still can, I would make like paper boats and whatnot, and we would use like newspaper and make really big paper boats, origami paper boats. And he had a pool. We would float them in the pool, and that would be like the ships off the coast and whatnot. We had such a good time growing up. But I remember me and this friend, we just had such a really good time growing up. And one day, the spark in my friend died, right? And it was like I hadn't seen him for a month or two during the summer because I had spent a summer up here, on vacation with my father. And I come back and I was all excited to see my friend. There's been multiple occasions where this has happened. And my friend, the spark inside of him died, and he didn't want to pretend anymore. He didn't want to play anymore. He just wanted to sit there and watch TV and laze around. It got to the point, like, he didn't even want me around. He would lie to me about him being off, not home, somewhere else. And I figured out that he was lying to me because I, called his mom. I was like, hey, let me talk to, such and such. I'm not going to say his name. She's like, oh, he's not here with me. He's at home. And I'm like, oh, I just talked to him not too long ago, and he said that he was there with you. She's like, no, you're being lied to. He's at home. And I'm like, okay. Man, that is heartbreaking. He was my best friend, dude. He really was a really good guy. But I could tell that he was at that age where the light inside of him was dying. And he was entering his angsty teenage years, and he just didn't really feel like pretending with me. And I remember looking at the time I had a bunch of military surplus stuff. I don't want to call him my grandfather, but he's basically the only thing that I have closest to a grandfather. Both of my grandfathers had passed away before I was born. But an older family friend who I did consider a grandfather back then, he was very big into military surplus and whatnot. And ironic as it is, a little off topic, back whenever I was in elementary school, I was the only kid in elementary school who was going to school not with just a regular ass backpack. I had a parachute bag from the United States military. The thing was absolutely massive on me. It said U.S. Army on it. It was just a massive jump bag, and that was what I used for my books and whatnot. I always got a lot of really weird looks whenever I'd walk around with that bag, and my family tried getting me to use other bags and whatnot, but I was like, no, I want to use this one. This is the bag that I'm going to be using for school, because I was very much in love with old Army stuff, and I love the history and the the everything behind it. But I had showed up at my friend's house with my bag of old Army stuff. I mean, we're talking like helmets, canteens, we're talking web gear, Alice gear, we're talking the bag itself. I mean, it was just filled to the brim with military surplus stuff that I had collected. And I just remember, like, I had jackets, I had a lot of military surplus stuff, to where, like, if you were a kid playing with military surplus, you could have a lot of fun with that stuff. And I showed up with this bag like I always did, and my buddy was like, nah, I don't want to. I'm not going to. And then he was like, yeah, if you want to go play with my little brother, you go ahead and you do it. And I remember being insulted about that at that age. I was like, okay. I mean, I liked the brother, don't get me wrong, but this guy right here, he was my friend, and he was saying, hey, get lost, go bug my brother. And I was insulted by it. And I remember him sitting there, like, watching some Star Wars thing on his television. And I remember looking down at my bag of stuff and looking back at him. And I was like, I never want to be like that. I always want to be the kind of guy to be out there playing with these old rifles. And then whenever I had hit of age and I was able to get these rifles, it, like, kind of, that old spark that I had came back. And my father got me the Mosin Nagant, he got me the 1911. I was like, wow, these are a couple of rifles that I've always dreamed of having growing up, and now I actually have them. And then I discovered that the gun store was not that far away from my house, and they had a bunch of military surplus there. And this was like right as the Obama era was getting started, so the gun panic buying really didn't take off. So the prices of firearms were definitely higher than they were before the scare, but it wasn't like at the peak of that. And I remember, like, going through, because I saw it coming, going through and trying to buy as much military surplus firearms as I could before the prices raised too terribly much. I didn't get very far, but I did manage to grab myself a couple of them. And as a result, I had some military surplus firearms that I was doing like a boatload of research for. I was just checking them out. There's a lot of time and effort that I spent indulging myself into these military firearms. And I loved every single minute of it. I haven't seen my friend that I grew up with since that day, like, where I could just tell that he was done. And he told me, I'm done pretending, I'm done acting like a child. And I was like, I'm not gonna become that. I want that fire, I want that spark that we had when we were kids. And don't get me wrong, it has degraded over the years as adulthood absolutely beats your soul into submission. But I still have that spark that I had when we were kids, and every time I pick up one of these old rifles, I can remember, I remember one of the times, it was like right after we had got done playing Call of Duty Finest Hour. We had just played like the Russian playthrough with Call of Duty Finest Hour. And me and him were out there with a couple of like really long sticks, and we were pretending that we had Mosin Nagants. And now I actually have one in real life. I mean, I've had one of these for a long time now, but this is still one of my favorite rifles. And I don't think I will ever be in a position where I do not own at least one Mosin Nagant, however it is that you feel like pronouncing that. But I'll never forget how excited I was whenever my father had finally given me one of these things. And like I said, he just bought it off the internet for a couple of bucks. And I remember like taking the rifle, aiming down the sights, and I was like, wow, this looks literally just like it does in the video games. And my father was like, yeah, I'll teach you to go out and how to shoot and whatnot. And I was like, I already know how to do that from Call of Duty. And he was like, what the hell is Call of Duty? And I was like, oh, it's just something that us kids do. It's basically firearms training virtualized. And he was like, okay, well, let's see what you got. So I go out there, and I remember, like, whenever we had gotten this, it was after we had moved from our hometown to this new town. And we were on our old property in this new town before we moved to this property. And I remember us going out to, I don't know, it was 50 to 70 yards away from our house. And we had just this big wooded area back there with a dirt hill in it, and we were setting up targets. Well, we set up some targets. I grabbed my Mosin Nagant that this guy had just bought me, and I was like, I know exactly what to do with this thing. He was like, how the hell do you know that? And I'm like, you have any idea how many times I've loaded one of these like a video game? So many times. Like, even to this day, with how often I've loaded these, I still firmly believe I've loaded them in video games way more often. I think I've loaded these rifles here. But he's like, all right, let's see what you got. At the time, I didn't have any stripper clips, so I just opened this thing up. He's like, all right, you know exactly how to open your rifle, and I just started loading them right into the top. I knew what the magazine cutoff, well, not the magazine cutoff, the round separation system in there was. I knew everything about it. He was like, all right, you loaded your rifle, so I closed it up. I take aim. I remember looking down my sights, and before I had used this Mosin, I had used 22 long rifles before, but that was the only time I ever had sights to aim down. And this was like years prior to that, and I was not exactly aiming down the sights. I was just kind of spraying in whatever direction that I was firing in. But me and my father were out there, and I remember aiming down my sights and knowing exactly what I was going to be looking at from Call of Duty. And all I did was I squeezed that trigger just like that, and I was making shots on target. And my father was like, wow, you're actually a half-decent shot. And I mean, I'm not a half-decent shot at all by any stretch of the imagination compared to actual shooters, but at, I don't know, the 15 yards that we were at, I was nailing whatever targets it is that we had out there. And I remember not long after that, I got my hands on some stripper clips. And then I was like, oh my god, I know exactly what these are. Whenever I first showed my father stripper clips, my father had like zero idea what they were, because he's used to seeing rifles that you either single load or that you put a magazine into the bottom, and he had never seen something like this. I was like, oh boy, you better buckle up. You know those bolt action rifles that we got? Give me that. And I grabbed the Mosin, and I grabbed this right here, crammed that right there, just, bam, that bastard is loaded, hot, ready to go. And he was like, wow, you could really load that bolt action rifle incredibly quickly with something like that. And I was like, yes you can, and boy am I happy about it. So we burned through a lot of ammo, like a lot of ammo, loading them up with these stripper clips, because we could just, I mean, you can load a bolt action rifle and fire it pretty damn quickly whenever you're loading it with stripper clips like that. Now, just because of ammo prices nowadays, I don't fire nearly as much as I used to. Nowadays, it's like 50 cents a shot for some of this Mosin Nagant ammunition. Just 7.62 by 54 rim. This is just like cheap tool ammo stuff. And back during the times that I would run my Mosin, it was like $45 for like 440 rounds. Those big spam tins. And I really regret not grabbing more of those. Actually, I've grabbed like a lot of those, like easily over 100 of those. I just shot them all. I put a lot of ammo through my Mosin Nagant, man. I'm telling you what. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that. And even to this day, whenever I come out here and I shoot these rifles, like every now and then, I'll just get that nostalgic flashback back to my friend and I sitting in our homemade foxhole. I remember, oh god, hold on, I got a story for you. I remember one time, me and my buddy, we had dug a hole in the front yard of my buddy's house. And my buddy's father comes home, like we were there all day by ourselves. We dug this foxhole, buddy's father comes home, he starts freaking out like, dude, why is there a 6-foot hole in my yard? I mean, this was a suburban household, like, it was so bad. We're talking a dude with like khaki shorts. He wore like the gardener's hat. He was one of those kind of guys. And he was like, why is there a giant hole in my yard? And me and my buddy, we were like, we can explain this. Just give us 1 second and it'll all make sense. And instead of trying to explain it, we run away and we run to the one place that we know he's not going to go looking for us. We hide in the goddamn foxhole and he doesn't find us. Oh my god. But yeah, we're over there hiding in this foxhole and we're eating like cans of Spam and ramen noodles because, I mean, like, that was the World War II Army food. Well, not actually, but that was our perception of the World War II Army food for back in that day. So, we were just out there eating these cans of Spam, like, whole cans of Spam. I ate like 4 of them that day. My blood pressure must have been through the roof. But we were just out there eating these cans of Spam and ramen noodles, and we had this canteen of water. I can't remember what actually happened to that canteen. I think I actually stuck it in the freezer, and it had burst, and that's really unfortunate. But it was one of those World War II style tin canteens. It was a reproduction, so nothing actually historically significant got destroyed. But we were out there with this canteen of water, and I remember us like drinking the water, and we ran out, and we had to go on a stealth mission to get more water, and we ended up like sneaking around the house trying not to get seen. It was, man, I miss being a kid, I tell you what. Of course, now that I'm an adult, I'm gonna hit the ground, see if I can knock that log over. Now that I'm an adult, I can play with the real toys. Of course, I'm not gonna go digging a 6-foot hole in my yard, but I don't know, I might find a good spot to dig a hole at. Aha! There we go, that's more like it. Go ahead and pick up my brass clip right here. These are the good Mosin clips, by the way, not those cheap Chinese steel ones that have been bent over to somewhat resemble clips. These ones are smooth and easy to use. But I could sit here telling you guys stories all day long about me pretending to fight off the Russians or the Germans or whoever it was that we were fighting back in those days. I do miss being a kid. Back when you could pretend, and back when you didn't have to worry about so many things like we do nowadays. I still have that spark that I had back whenever I was a kid, but it's definitely not as great as it was. And I think that is the same case with a lot of people. If my friend, well, honestly, I'm not sure what kind of person he grew up to. I mean, that was 20 years ago at this point. If my friend could see the collection that I have now, like if me from back then could see the collection that I have now, but man, I'd be flying off the walls. I would be so excited to see what I have available to me now, and I would be like, I know what that is, I know what that is, I know what this is, I know how this works. Because that's just what I did growing up after seeing them all in these movies and TV shows and whatnot. I was just so excited to learn about them. And my friend, honestly, I probably wouldn't have gotten into firearms if it wasn't for my friend, because he was just as enthusiastic until he wasn't. And I think it was that loss of his enthusiasm that really like nailed in, like put that last nail in the coffin for me, where I was like, this is what I'm doing, and I am not going to let myself become that. And I did not want to lose that passion for these historic relics. And to this day, I'm out here playing with them. And that is the story on how I became a gun guy. So hopefully it was at least a little bit entertaining, and it wasn't too rambling, although I'm sure that somebody in there is going to complain about it being too rambling, and I doubt that anyone is going to watch all the way to the end. If you did make it to the end, let me know. And perks on you. So I'm gonna go ahead and say, hey folks, thanks for watching. This video's gone on long enough, and I think I've told enough personal story here. If you guys have any personal stories that you feel like telling me, by all means let me know down below. I'm sure that you're gonna do that anyway. You guys are pretty good at doing that. And I'm going to go grab something to drink. Actually, some coffee sounds fantastic. I'm gonna go grab some coffee. You guys go have yourself a fantastic day. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Description down below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go ahead and go check that out. God damn it, I'm gonna go shoot some more guns. You guys have a good one. I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt action shotguns aren't more mainstream.